video, I will show you how to add boning to your Easy Breathe mask in order to maximize the breathing area and minimize fabric motion for comfort, to maintain maximized surface area for best filtration, and to add an additional layer behind the center seam. The first half of this video is to show you how to sew that boning into a new mask, and the second half of the video will show you how to retrofit that into a mask you already own. We'll start with a brief review of the Breathe Easy mask making process. If you have never made a Breathe Easy mask before, then you will want to go back and get all of the specifics for how to make it in the first video, and then just use this video to learn how to insert the boning. Let's get started. First, I'm going to cut my knit fabric, and this is going to be for the hem, and I'm also going to cut my straps that will go around my head. I'm going to take my stretch chiffon or whatever fabric you have chosen to use for this project and cut out my Olson mask pattern, just the face pieces. And I need 2 face pieces with wrong sides together, pinned. I'm going to choose a bobbin and a needle color, and then I'm going to sew a very narrow 1/16 to 1/8 inch seam down the middle. Again, right sides were together, but now I'm turning it so that the wrong sides are together, and I'm pinning and sewing a 1/4 inch seam now right down this same seam. By doing that seam twice, we have created a channel that we're going to be able to work with later. Now I'm pinning on that 1 inch knit strip that we cut, and I'm just putting 1 pin at the beginning, and I am going to sew a 1/4 inch seam with right sides together. So the right side of the knit is facing the right side of the face fabric. I'm now going to roll that hem all the way to the back. I'm going to fold it in half and then in half again, and I'm going to fold it right along the seam where the knit fabric meets the face fabric, and then I'm going to sew that at about 3/8 inch seam allowance. I'm using magic clips here. These are mini magic clips, and they go beautifully right under my presser foot, and I can use them as little pushing handles, and I love these little magic clips. Now is the time to insert our boning or zip tie. So we're going to add a little piece of nylon or plastic into that French seam channel. We have 2 choices. The first is an 8 inch zip tie, and you may have these laying around your house. These are going to be cheaper per mask than doing the option on the right. Using the right option, which is feather light boning from Hobby Lobby, that boning material is already in a casing, a cotton casing. And so we're going to take it out of its cotton casing anyway. If you can purchase it already out of a casing, that's great. I've saw some of that on Etsy in larger rolls. This comes in 2-yard packages, so you will be able to get about 12 masks out of the boning. So if you sewed a wide seam, the boning may be better. If you sew a very narrow seam, perhaps you would rather use the zip ties or cable ties. I go ahead and cut them to 6 inches, clip off each of the 2 corners, and then file down that sharp edge so you don't rip your fabric. Put in the edge that was already finished and a little more pointed, and just slip that right down the channel that you created by sewing a French seam. And once it goes all the way in, it's going to hit the seam at the top hem. If you choose to use the boning instead, as you can see, I'm just pulling it out of the casing, and I'm going to cut a 6 inch strip. You may notice by the time you get to the center of the coil, it's curved a little too much. So I just wanted to show you what we can do about that. So I took some water at about 180 degrees Fahrenheit, just below the simmering point. And I placed my strip of boning into the water, and I let it sit for about a minute. Picked it out, let it cool ever so slightly, and then quickly straightened it as much as I wanted. And you can just see the difference between the 2 profiles. Once I cut that 6 inch strip, I will go ahead and clip the corners off just to make it a little bit more rounded on both edges. And then take that nail file again, or a piece of sandpaper, and really take that down to a nice, smooth, rounded edge. You want to be looking at the back of your mask, and you want that to be smiling at you. I'm going to take that rounded edge and I'm going to slip it in. You want to push that boning all the way to the top hem, and then you can put a pin or a clip or something to keep it from slipping out. We will sew this next strip down as we've done before, and this is just going to be a quick seam at 1/4 inch seam allowance. Again, I just make it fit as we go. Make sure you don't sew over your pin or over the boning. So be real careful. You're going to want to take your time with this particular step. I sped up the rest of the footage, but this is just real time what it takes to get around this little piece of plastic. Once you're free of it, again, just line up so your raw edges are even and just work down the rest of your hem. I'll show you here that you can see that that boning is separate from the seam. It is not attached to the seam or go in the seam at all. You want to keep that free. You want it free so you can turn it down so the seam between the face fabric and knit fabric rides right along the bottom of that boning. Then you want to clip it in place, and then finish clipping the rest of the seam as we have done for this process in the past. Again, I start at the center seam and then I clip the end, and then I just kind of stretch it a little bit and pull those points out in the middle and clip the whole hem down at that point. And we're going to sew this again at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Be real careful. Again, I use my magic clips and they go right under the presser foot so I can help guide my fabric with them. You do need to be very careful though. You do not want to sew over those clips. Those will break your needle. We are coming up to the center seam with the boning in it, and now we are going to sew over and through the boning. I am using a 70-10 sharp needle and I go extremely slowly. It's going to take about 4 stitches to go over the width of the boning, and my needle has gone through many masks already at this point with boning in it, so it has been really a champion. Just go really slow so you don't break your needle. If your machine will not do it, just work around it. Go all the way up to the boning and then back tack a little bit and back up and start again on the other side immediately after the boning. Take off your clips and you can see that the bottom boning is actually nicely placed in that seam all the way and sewn through and secured. The top, however, is not, because we are going to use that very upper hem channel to place our wire in just a minute. So I'm going to go ahead and trim up all these edges. Then I'm going to create ear channels by just folding it over twice in any direction that makes it fit the best and sewing close to that left fold. And again, using those magic clips to help push through all that bulk under the presser foot. Make sure you back tack these seams because they are going to be the last seam that goes in and it's going to stabilize the whole project. Clip your threads, and then we're going to clip a little bit of the knit, just a little snip, and you want to slide in your wire. Let's just quickly thread in those head ties. That is a completed Breathe Easy mask with a strip of boning in the front. In this part of the video, I'm going to show you how to retrofit boning into a mask that you already own. We're going to take a completely sewn mask and we're going to rip open just a few tiny little stitches and insert the boning into the center French seam. I have already explained the boning options and have shown you how to prepare each option in the last part of the video. So you want to take out your wire and find where the bottom of your mask is, and we are going to just rip open a couple of stitches either side of the center seam at the bottom of the mask. I use a seam ripper. If you have very tiny little scissors, you could use that as well. You want to be very careful to only pick at the sewing thread and not pick at any threads in the fabric. As you can see, I just pulled a few stitches either side of the French seam open, and then you can pull the hem up on the back. And that will reveal the rest of the French seam that's tucked under the hem. And we're going to pop that out, and we are going to break open a few stitches on the edge of the French seam. We're going to be working in the space that will be under the hem ultimately, and we're just going to break open 2 or 3 stitches right above the seam line that is still intact. Once you have a few stitches opened up, you can either take your zip tie and slide that into your French seam, or you can cut the boning, and again rounded beautifully on both edges as I showed you in the beginning of this video, and slide that into the channel of the French seam. If you are retrofitting a mask that has a very narrow French seam, I recommend using the zip tie because this featherlight boning is a 1/4 inch. If it is a little too long, go ahead and trim it to fit. You want it to ride right at the bottom seam line of where the hem meets the face fabric. So once you've slipped it in, just refold the hem over top of the boning. That hole that we opened up in the French seam is going to be completely covered by the hem when we're all finished. And we are going to sew right over that seam line that we removed. I use a magic clip to hold everything in place. And I start right on the old seam line, and that will trace the old seam line by a few stitches. And then we'll very carefully sew through the boning that we have added. Takes about 3 or 4 stitches to cross the boning, and then you want to just sew right into the seam line that is still there, and that will stabilize your seam. So as you can see, the boning is in the bottom seam line, in the hem, but it is not in the upper seam, and we have reserved that space for the wire. And the boning is just taking up the entire width of the French seam, and we can just go ahead and slip that wire back in, and that wire will help give you a really good fit. So there we have retrofitted a mask with boning, and that will keep that away from your nose as you breathe. The fabric on the cheeks will still move in and out, but it gives you a more comfortable, more breathable mask. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe.